and we've got some good questions for today. And this series really came out of this question that I've been wrestling with. I've been thinking about a lot. I even posted it out there on Facebook, and some of you chimed in with some interesting answers. And it is not an easy question. I think it's a pretty deep question. It's a question without simple answers. And as I began to dive into this question, I began to realize, like, this is probably not just a one or two service thing. This is probably a series. And so I created a new series, Graphics, and we're calling it Christoformed. This is the idea of being formed into the image of Christ. But we've looked at that topic in general quite a bit over the past year or so. And I wanted to ask the question in a little different way. What does it take to bring transformation? Transformation maybe of a life, but also of a nation, a society, and a world. You know, we live in a society that wants change, that sometimes longs for change, that sometimes protests change, for change or against change. Sometimes we are resistant to these things. But what is God's plan for the transformation of society and the world? What is the place of people in that plan? What can we do to be a part of that? Can we do anything to bring that about quicker? Can we do anything to hinder that? What does it take? What is the answer? And you may already have things come into your mind. Save those for Delta groups. That's coming up. And you'll have a chance to kind of engage with that. But I want to start by acknowledging that we live in a world that is changing at an incredible rate. And some change maybe is obviously for the better. I think the fact that we actually have like underground sewage is a change for the better, right? We used to talk about pollution. Like I hear at the turn of the 1900s that pollution for them was horse manure in the streets. So yeah, we do have to worry about pollution in our air, but at least you don't have horse manure down your streets, right? That's a positive change, I think. Maybe some of you want to go back to that. It's all right. Some of you hey, I'd be riding horses down the street. That sounds pretty awesome, right, Kara? That's so some change is good, but other change maybe not so much. And change on top of that is happening so fast that it can seem out of control. And some, in fact, are postulating that we might be on the verge of such large change that humanity very shortly could be very unrecognizable to what came before. Now, some of you have walked downtown and you've said, yeah, I don't recognize this from what was before. People look strange sometimes. And there's change. But in fact, there are some that think that we are on the verge of the next step of human evolution or transformation that would move us towards a singularity, that humanity would transcend its current limits and perhaps even solve some of life's biggest problems. There are some that are speculating that we may be, in fact, at a time in history where the first person who will live to be over 1,000 years old has already been born. And we know what Methuselah in the Bible got pretty close, but it's been a long time. Or how old was Methuselah? Help me with that. He was probably older, right? There we go, 969, is that right? So some are saying that actually, and how could this be? Well, if you think about this, if our technology, even in the next few years, figures out how to extend human life 25 years, how much more change will happen in that additional 25 years that could extend it another 100 years? And maybe in that next 100 years to extend it another 150 years after that, and before you know it, have we conquered death with technology? Now, I know others, though, are saying, can that kind of change ever be achieved by human capabilities? And in fact, instead of being optimistic about the future, many are, in fact, incredibly pessimistic about the future. What if in our research and our scientific undertakings that we inadvertently set off a chain of events that takes us back to the Stone Age, that reverses what progress may be there and leaves us in a state even worse than before? Whatever we gain in technology, perhaps we're not actually gaining in wisdom. And maybe if we did live to be like 500, how much would we have forgotten by that point in time, right? That's actually one of the bigger problems that people who are doing age-based research are running into, is even if we can physically extend our bodies, what happens to our minds? I mean, I'm already starting to lose mine, right? So what happens to all that? To some of you, both of these extremes seem rather far-fetched, either an extremely optimistic or an extremely pessimistic future. But I remind you, no one knows what our future holds, save the Lord. I mean, for goodness sake, we did elect Trump, and nobody really predicted that. Maybe a few people. But one thing's for certain, the world is changing. And so most of us are agreed. There are some things that need change. Maybe even a lot needs to change. And maybe, even if it's not a dramatic change, we know that there's too much needless violence, too much evil, too much conflict, too much poverty, too much insecurity, that something at some point is going to break. Something at some point needs to break the cycles that we are in. So maybe you feel like we're taking a turn in the right direction, but maybe you also feel like there's a lot of opposition. Even if things were going well by normal standards, isn't there so much that could be going better? And this is just from a largely materialistic point of view. What about spiritually? I mentioned the idea of growing in wisdom, but what about growing in awareness of who we are as people? And as the people of God, aren't we supposed to be about and bringing some sort of spiritual change to our world? Some sort of goodness or flavor, some sort of salt or light? Or does what we do even really matter in the bigger picture? Maybe God is sovereign and he's got it all mapped out. He's the one with the most influence anyway. What could we as individuals do? Surely, in one sense, the responsibility for change should lie in the hands of the one that has the power to do everything about it. In fact, some good Christian denominations feel like everything's all predetermined and the role that we hold is negligible compared to the role that God has. Or perhaps God acts with his mighty power when people invite him to. Or perhaps God has left room for people to pray, to unleash his power to act. Or perhaps he's already acted and unleashed incredible energy and power upon this earth and empowered people by his Spirit to engage, to bring about real change, to bring about real hope, not just a fragment or figment of one's imagination, but a solid rock of hope. A hope for a future, hope for restoration, a hope for something more. And so this is the introduction, and by the way, I'm raising a lot of questions today. I'm not going to answer all of them today. And some of them may have difficult answers or challenging answers, but even so, this starts our journey to ask some thoughtful questions, but questions that intersect us with our hearts and souls as we enter into the tumultuous world of change and perhaps are invited to be an agent of God's grace, of God's change, of God's unfolding and shaping and molding that is taking place in this world. Does this sound intriguing to you? I hope it does. Does it sound challenging to you? I hope it does. And so let's turn to some words of Scripture that talk to us as the people of God, that challenge us to examine the future. And today I want to address this idea of the possibility of transformation. The possibility of transformation. So we have these amazing paintings from our last series that kind of help us tell a little bit of the backstory, a little bit of the big view. So we're going to walk through just a little bit of that, but I'm going to hone in on a few specific passages as we go. So God's goal for the cosmos and creation was that all creation would exist for his glory, that he would create true persons that would fellowship with one another and with him, that we would live in perfect harmony, not only with him, but with the rest of creation for eternity. But he gave us a true choice and a true warning, as the first panel shows. Our fall, I don't think, was neither assured nor accidental. Think about that for a second. It's kind of mind-blowing. But it was willful, intentional disobedience, crossing the lines that broke that relationship with God. And so since that day, we have been at odds with God and his creation. In ancient times, it seemed that though the chaos of creation would overwhelm us, perhaps the violence of oceans closing in upon the land, or the waters of or the wastes of drought and desert causing famine, or wild beasts unstoppable lurking in the wilderness. Can you imagine like dinosaurs in Eden? I don't know. I just took a moment to do that while I was putting this together. I was like, it's kind of crazy. And can you imagine after the fall, dinosaurs? Like if, I know modern science kind of like laughs at this idea of humans and dinosaurs together, but just in my mind, I don't know how it all works out. But to think about that, like living when large lizards were around you, I mean, that would be bizarre, right? You would be terrified that creation was going to get you, right? Now we're worried we might damage the earth. Then you would be worried that like this thing might overwhelm any chance society has. And that was the fear early on. But in modern times, it appears that humanity might have the upper hand, and through overuse or overpopulation or overindulgence, that we might overrun creation itself and leave the land barren. Though, of course, a good storm or maybe even recurring winter reminds us to have humility and to think that maybe we should realize, if not for the grace of God, that Mother Nature might still outlast us all. And so even in the midst of this struggle, we seek an Eden, at least harmony with this earth and somehow maybe with one another. And one strange example of this on the next slide is this idea of the biosphere too. Anybody remember this? I remember hearing about this when I was a kid, and this was just a crazy concept. It was a modern attempt to recreate an environment, an ecosystem with specially controlled conditions that might model what it would be like to live in perfect equilibrium with our own conditions and maybe with one another in such a controlled little environment. It's actually quite large. There's one portion of that humanity, that people actually attempted to live in. The idea was that somehow by doing this, we could preserve our future. Maybe a way to recreate Eden on earth, the perfect balance of things, or at worst case scenario, encapsulate this in some sort of spaceship so that we could go on our way to find some sort of other planet having the perfect environment. Yes, youth, you may think this is some sort of science fiction movie gone astray. This really happened, actually. It still exists. In fact, you can read on the Wikipedia page that it was actually only used twice for its original purpose in its experiments in 1991 to 1993, second time in March to September of 1994. And both events, though heavily publicized, ran into problems, including low amounts of food and oxygen, animals that died off. And essentially, with the internal failures and the external politics, the experiments were set to close down. And if it was not for Columbia University and later University of Arizona, it would have been paved over and replaced with a mall. Our quest for Eden eventually actually lead to failure, so it seems. But this quest would not be so foolhardy, except for the fact that with the expulsion from Eden, God gave the hope that one day the sons of Adam and the daughters of Eve would crush the head of the serpent. That God continually then called out and invited his people to a land of promise, that he would make them into a great nation, that he would bless them once again in a way that would triumph over the curse, and that he would let all the nations of the earth be blessed through them. And so God, in ancient times, provided pictures for that restoration to come, presented in the deliverance of his people, the establishment of the temple, the triumph over the pagan enemies, some of which we have different images of up here today. The temple itself showed a picture of a transformed cosmos. In fact, I found this really interesting article. I'd heard of this before, but I hadn't read a lot about it. but the idea that the temple imagery and the way it was constructed and everything, even in the ancient world, not only in Jewish culture, but in Hebrew culture, reflected the idea of the whole cosmos, the whole of creation, not just our lone little slice of it. I know this may seem a little esoteric, but I wanted to share a little bit from a gentleman, PhD professor, no slouch, actually, a professor at Wheaton University, and someone who studied ancient cultures in the extreme. His name is Dr. John Walton, professor of Old Testament at Wheaton College, PhD in Hebrew and cognate studies from Hebrew Union College. This guy's a pretty heavy academic hitter. He says this. He says, when we think about the world and the universe in American culture, we're most inclined to think of it as a machine. In the ancient world, however, Israelites, as well as all their neighbors, would have been inclined to think about the cosmos as a kingdom. Furthermore, they would have understood the cosmos as a temple. The following entry explores this matter. The temple on earth was considered to be a type of a larger, archetypical cosmic temple. And there are so many images and symbols that evoke the relationship between the temple and the cosmos, and itself a microcosmos. In Egypt, the temple contained within its sacred precincts a representation of the original primeval hill that emerges from the cosmic waters. In short, the temple was considered the deity's cosmic domain. The concept is represented in the design of temples. In Mesopotamia, the primary image of the temple was that of the center of the cosmos. In Syrio-Palestine, the temple is the archetypical embodiment of the cosmic mountain. This is represented in Ugaritic literature as well as in the Bible, where Mount Zion is understood as the mountain of the Lord, Psalm 48, and the place where his temple, a representation of Eden, was built. Isaiah 66:1, the Lord indicates, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that you will build for me, and where will my resting place be? Here, God indicates that the man-made temple cannot be considered a true temple or the true temple. It is only a micro-scale representation of the cosmic temple. Psalm 78:69 communicates a similar idea by indicating that the temple was built on the model of the cosmos. Ideas like this are also found in literature from Mesopotamia that compares temples to the heavens and the earth and gives them a cosmic location and function. It is evident then that Israel and her neighbors shared an ideology that understood that the cosmos in temple terms and viewed the temple as a model of the cosmos or as the cosmic temple. What's this all about? Cosmic temple imagery? Doesn't that sound strange? Probably not something you're used to hearing about. What it's saying is each time people were building a place to worship, they're trying to get back to that place where man and God met, where God lives and reigns and rules the cosmos. Dr. Walton continues to write, he says this, once we understand this concept, we can understand that the temple would be seen as the control room of the cosmos from which God sustains creation and history. We can see that the Israelites, along with their neighbors, viewed the universe on terms more theological and in functional terms rather than in strictly material terms. It was the dedication of this first temple fixed by Solomon where we look into the possibility of change. Though there's already, of course, been numerous biblical examples along the way. See, is this place where David's son Solomon built this house for God. This, of course, wasn't big enough to contain God and who he actually was. It was the place where God chose to let his presence reside. A place that would represent God not giving up on his creation. A place that represented the Holy of Holies, God himself intersecting with his creation. This amount of power was seen to be, in fact, so overwhelmingly pure that it was seen as destructive to anybody who would enter in that was impure, or unholy, or unclean. 2 Chronicles describes the whole scene like this. Solomon had finished praying, and fire came down from heaven, consumed the burnt offerings and sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the house. The priests could not enter into the house of the Lord because the glory of the Lord filled it. And all the sons of Israel, seeing fire coming down from the glory of the Lord on the house, bowed to the pavement with their faces to the ground, and they worshipped, and they gave praise to the Lord, saying, truly he is good. Truly his loving kindness is everlasting. They made an incredible amount of sacrifices. The priests stood at their posts. The Levites had instruments made by King David. And they played, and they sang, his loving kindness is everlasting. Because what they were realizing is that God had not given up on his creation. God had blessed them. And God had raised them up to really what in many ways was seen to be the peak of the Old Testament people of God. Though we remember from the story that this was not very long lasting. This was, since Eden, the time where God seemed closest to his people as a community and closest to transforming his creation back into the glory that he had meant for it at the beginning of the world. One night, shortly thereafter, the Lord appeared to Solomon. And he said to him, I've heard your prayer. I've chosen this place for myself as a house of sacrifice. If I would shut up the heavens so that there's no rain, or if I command locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, and my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin, and I will heal their land. Seems like an odd thing for God to say. Oh, by the way, but this actually fits into the broader context of covenant that God had spoken. That is, I'll be your God and you'll be my people. And if there's this relationship that works the way it's built to work, then there'll be life and a blessing. But if you reject that, then there's death and a curse that comes because you cut yourself off from the author of all life. That's when you do that, that's the only possibility. And so in that place, he's saying, if you found yourself cut off, but if you return, I'll be waiting for you there. I'll be waiting for you there with life. In fact, this is what starts to astound me. We focus on that, hey, if you humble yourself and return, but listen what God's saying. He says, my eyes, this is God saying, my eyes will be open, my ears will be attentive to the prayers offered in this place. For I've chosen this consecrated house that my name will be there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there perpetually. God's saying, I'm committed to be a part of this thing. Now, again, we know from the story, and he gives them a heads up here. Hey, if you walk before me, if you do what I've commanded you, you kept my statutes and ordinances, then I'm going to establish you, Solomon. That's what he says to them, just as I covenanted with David. But if you forsake my statutes and my commands, and you turn away, you go and serve other gods and worship them, then you'll be uprooted from the land. And this house that I've consecrated to my name will be cast out of my sight. I will make you a proverb and a byword to the nations. As for this house that's exalted, anyone who passes by will be astonished and will say, why has the Lord done such thing? And they will say, oh, it's because they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers who brought them out of Egypt. They adopted other gods and worshiped them and served them. Therefore, he has brought this adversity upon them. This encounter shows us a few things, at least in the story of ancient Israel. One, that God, though God was sovereign, though he knew the outcome as it played out throughout all the history of Israel, that he truly gave his people as a whole a choice to participate in the directions that things would unfold. He prepared them for a future and gave the option of one that was good, as he had even back at Sinai. There's a way of life and blessing, death and a curse. but he chose to continually to invite them to that place of decision to continue in the presence that he had promised. Now, however you reconcile that theologically, which I think it can be, there's an honest and true choice that God has invited his people into. They were actually at the peak of their nation in many ways spiritually, again, for a short period of time, having risen to a massive point, basically the point from there that they would always turn back and look to as, how can we get back there? And the possibility was there that things could go forward in a beautiful, amazing way, or they could turn away and have it all removed. And in spite of that, God continually offered a way forward for the future. And unfortunately, what the people of God in the past did over and over and over again was to continually go astray. Continually go back to what they felt was easier, what they felt was the quicker way to their own success, what they felt met their instant and material needs, what they felt made them like the nations, what they felt would somehow take them forward without having to follow the promise that God had given them. And every time they did that, it led them to a place where they were cut off from God. But never through any of that did God say, I'm done with you. He did say, there's a point that will come that I'll take my eyes off this place. But he didn't say, it's over. So we keep searching for Eden. If we don't go to his temple, which promises it, we build temples of our own. We build things that are facsimiles, cheap knockoffs, in hopes that we'll find that connection with God. Ancient Israel did it, and I wonder how often do we continue to do that? How often do we look for that perfect thing, that perfect place, that perfect whatever that will fulfill that desire to have everything right again? When do we get there? Sometimes we even look for that perfect person. We even say to people, you complete me. But the reality is it doesn't work. Nothing else can make that connection. Why is it that we keep seeking these other things? And yet, why is it that God doesn't give up on us? That he always intervenes. And so these very words of promise to Solomon that were incredibly conditional, yet in God's economy, he still held true. There would be a king that would always be on the throne in such a different, distinct, and more amazing way. These words, they were filled in Christ, who's the man of David that would always sit on the throne of Israel. And not only that, sits on the throne of the cosmos. Sits on the real throne that even these earthly ones only image. And so I believe that we as individuals, as a community, as a society, have a standing invitation because of what Christ accomplished. Standing invitation to respond to that call of God, to enter into his work of transforming this world. You see, we have this Sunday after Easter, where the cross and the empty tomb both proclaim the power of God's transformation in a way that was seen that far surpassed Solomon. We have an empty grave, a tomb open. In fact, we're told it wasn't just the tomb of Jesus that was open, but when Jesus shouted out in Matthew 27, the only gospel to record this story, that when Jesus died, that at that moment, that curtain of the temple that separated the holy from the unholy was torn from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection, and they went into the holy city, and they appeared to many people. And when the centurion and those who were with him were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified, and they exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." That picture of the cosmos, the temple, representing the perfect place, that holy place, now broke open. And instead of bringing death upon those that were impure, it invited us into the transforming life of God. Brought resurrection. That means that death is not stronger than Christ. If death is not stronger, no disease is stronger. No addiction, no struggle, no pain, no power can separate us from the love of Christ. No government below or principality above. If Christ is resurrected, then what he said is true. He is the way, he is the truth, he is the life. Whom the Son sets free is free indeed. If Christ was resurrected, then those who place their trust in him can be confident that we too will experience the resurrection on the last day. And for those who are faithful to him, we will hear, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant, enter into your rest." If Christ was resurrected, then you too can be assured that those who have left Christ and fallen away, those who experience a life of hardship without him, that he's still there calling and waiting for them with the heart of the Father, wanting to invite them home. I believe his eyes are not just present in the temple as the past, but through the power of the Holy Spirit watching anywhere to redeem those who call upon his name, who look to him for salvation, those even who have gone astray and been afar off. 2 Corinthians 3:17 reminds us that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we who, with unveiled faces, we who, unlike Moses, who had to cover his face from the glory of God, we contemplate the Lord's glory now in a very different way. And it begins to transform us with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. And so God's plan for transformation is underway. God's plan for changing this world it's rolling. It's already happening. It's going. It started really in the mind of God, I think, before the foundation of the world, but we saw its victory at the cross and with the empty tomb. And it means that God, being fully God, loves this cosmos. As John proclaimed, by the way, when it says, for God so loved the world, word there is cosmos, by the way. It's not just our little world. It's his creation. It's his world that he has given himself for. And so his call for transformation is a call that will be answered. It will be brought to completion, and he invites us into that. As Romans 12:2 says, "So do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good and pleasing and perfect will. And so even Paul, with great pathos, states to those who are in the process in the church in Galatians, church that he really struggled with. You actually read Paul's letter in Galatians, he has very few nice words to say to them. But what he does say to them is he says, I even with the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. So what does it take to enter into that transformation? What does it take personally? What does it take nationally? What does it take socially? What does it take globally? That we would experience this transforming power that God has. I believe it is to be Christ formed, the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authority, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things. He holds all things together. In him, all things are held together, and he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn among the dead, so that in everything he might have sovereignty and supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, that is Christ, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God and you were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior, but now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel, this is the gospel that you heard, and which has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul writes in Colossians 1, have become a servant. Let's pray. Jesus, we kind of tackle these big questions, and sometimes our minds are blown, sometimes our minds are numb, sometimes our minds wander. Lord, I'm certain today that you are here. You're looking for those that would turn to you. I just want to let you know, if you've gone astray today, if you've found yourself cut off from God, or this God stuff doesn't seem to make any sense to you, there is one that's calling your name, wants to invite you to be changed. I can't promise you what that journey will look like. I can't promise you that it will be easy. I can't promise you that it will be quick. But it will be good. And it will be brought to completion. It will last for eternity. The first step is to look to Christ. He's changed our world. His death and resurrection is the reason why today you're in a church that's hearing this message preached. You wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that. This same Christ loves you, gave his life for you, no matter what you've done or where you've been. So all it takes today is to open your heart. Just like in the ancient world, there are things we do that block us from God. When we look to other gods, or we build our own little temples, we have our own little idols, those things disrupt that connection with the God who's created us and with the one that we're meant to know. But he said he won't hold that against us if we confess those things, we turn from them and we turn towards him, he will receive us. He's already paid the penalty and the price for any wayward act. He's ready to receive you today. The same Christ, he's here today. This isn't about saying words to me or to those around you. At this moment to respond to the same Jesus. Just tell him you need him. You need his forgiveness, that you need his grace. You need his strength. He invites you to walk with him, to teach you, to give you his spirit within you, to give you the strength and the courage to overcome whatever obstacles you may face. Church, faith family, I invite you today. It's easy for us that have even once tasted of so many good things of God to lose our focus and lose our way. But God's got good works prepared for us in advance to do. He's got a way that he's called us to walk in, a way that's different from this world, that has different values, prioritizes different things. I want to challenge you through this day in this series that this would not just be same old, but that we would submit ourselves to that continued process of holding our hearts before the Lord and our spirits before the Lord and saying, take me and use me. When God calls for us to be engaged in sometimes the tough work of transformation, we'd say, here am I, send me. When God calls us to live differently, that we'd say, by the grace and power of God. When God calls us to step out in faith, that we would step out. When God calls us to stay true and to hold on, that we would hold on. Because in the end, it's not us alone by any means. It's the power of God working through us. For some strange reason, some mystery, that's the way he chooses to engage this world. So look to Christ. Be transformed. Be Christ-formed. Lord, is our prayer that you would do this in us, that you would do this through us, that we would be a part of your work in this world. Lord, I pray that you would have your way and, Lord, lead us and guide us down this journey. Give us patience, that we would even wait when it's time to wait. Give us courage that we would act when it's time to act. I pray these things in the powerful name of our Lord Jesus Christ.